Nope.
So this idea that the friction is always something that is negative can actually be flipped on its head.
I need to come up with a better way to not succumb to that. That's my kryptonite.
Friction is the things in life that make it harder to reach your goals.
But we're moving so fast that we don't really take the time to understand why we're stuck.
And we can actually start to use this friction as something that's positive.
Where the mind goes.
So you had mentioned to me before that you struggle building consistent habits around your nutrition.
Yeah.
I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about why you think that is. Give me maybe a few reasons why it's tough for you to build consistent habits around nutrition.
Good question. I think for me, it comes down to energy. And so in the midst of the week, cooking and eating well is so hard. I get to the end of the day and I'm toast. Even if I have time, like one, time is a limiting factor often, right? But even if I have time, I'm usually just so tired. And so trying to come up with a recipe or go to the store and get what I need, blah, 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 right? Like what I've learned about myself is if I don't buy groceries and meal plan on Sunday, it just doesn't happen. I just fall right off the train. And the whole week I just end up eating out because I don't have anything.
Sounds to me like what you're saying is that the hardest part about building consistent habits around nutrition is just simply the fact that requires a lot of preparation. It requires this idea that I have to have things in the house. I have to have the time to make those things. And it has to be something that I'm actually either excited about eating or, I'm willing to enjoy. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's some people I know who are great, at like, oh, I'm just going to go look in the fridge and I'll just make something with what I have. That for some reason takes so much mental energy for me. I immediately just don't want to do it. Unless it's a weekend. Like if it's a Saturday and I have 3 hours and I'm just cooking for the fun of it, I love that. Right. But that's not most days.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I just feel this exhaustion when I even think about doing that at the end of a workday.
So it sounds like there's a lot of friction involved with building consistent habits around nutrition, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I go up and down. It's very much like one week I'm solid and the next week I tank.
Yeah. No, I agree. I couldn't agree more. And I have some of the same friction involved with consistency around nutrition, a lot of, friction involved with other habits as well. And I use the word friction specifically because I've really gravitated towards this week recently. So we've talked about the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, right? We've talked about a few different aspects of the book, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was this idea of the friction. And the way the friction is described in the book is pretty simple. The friction is a force of resistance or an obstacle that makes it harder to achieve our goals related to our habits. A little more simply put, right, the friction is the things in life that make it harder to reach your goals. I've been thinking about this a lot, especially in my fitness coaching business. One of the things that I do with most new clients is I take them through this exercise called the Find the Friction exercise.
Oh, cool.
And what this really helps you do is identify all these different avenues of where the friction could be coming in your life and how it's preventing you from creating consistent habits. So let's take the habit that you just talked about trying to build consistency around nutrition, right? Sounds like some of the friction that you're struggling with, right, is related to the time it takes to meal prep, right? The time it takes to come up with recipes to cook and the time and effort that it takes to go buy the things that you need to have ready. Sounds like once you have all of those things though, being consistent is actually a lot easier, right? And those are the different types of friction that you're dealing with. So I use the term friction a lot, and I really like to gravitate towards this word because it really reminds me of this idea that there's a force acting against the way I'm trying to move, right? Similar to how friction is. And friction can come in all different shapes and sizes. It can be constant, it could be sporadic. Friction can come from internal sources of friction or external sources of friction. And then even within then, you can get into the different types of friction, psychological or physiological friction. There's social and cultural friction. There's environmental and socioeconomic friction or knowledge-based friction.
What's a concrete example? Like, give me an example of some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about internal friction, for instance, right?
Okay.
So in the concept of just where this friction is coming from, right? There could be procrastination, right? Laziness or lack of self discipline that hinders your progress to move towards your habits. There can be physiological issues like chronic pain and fatigue or discomfort and physical limitations, right? Pain that's keeping you from being able to, let's take your nutrition thing, right? Let's say you have really bad lower leg pain that hurts every time you're standing for more than 20 minutes. Well, you're not going to want to go to the grocery store and be able to walk around and spend time building or creating meal plans, right? So the idea that there's these different types of friction, right, that are keeping you from doing the things that you want to do, they come in many different buckets. And I think it's important to start to understand where this friction is so that when you're thinking about the habits you're trying to build, right, you can understand, okay, where is the friction coming from? So sources of social friction for me would be things like uh, our culture here in Fort Collins is heavily based around going to breweries, right? And this idea that, oh, it's the summer and we're going to be going out, and where do you want to meet? Well, let's go grab a drink. And how do I go unwind at the end of the day with my wife if we're not going to go to a place to grab a drink, right? Parties with friends, right? How do I not indulge in the food that's out on the table or the drinks that are available? Because that's how my friends like to communicate and get together, right? So maybe not necessarily cultural, but definitely more social. Do you find that there's any places within your life that you can start to think about, okay, maybe there's other parts of this habit of nutrition I'm trying to build that maybe aren't internal sources of friction, but more external sources of friction?
100%. I think I eat really healthy when I food prep and cook at home. I'm great at that,
Hmm.
you know? But the moment I go out to eat, it's like a lot of that goes out the window. And I think what happens is I'm with friends, and it's also a financial piece, right? I'm with friends. I would rather like save money maybe and cook at home, but I don't want to be the person who says no or is like, I'd rather not go out, I'd rather just like cook at home. And then people are like, well, I really wanted to go out. So I guess we're not hanging out, and then I'm like, well, damn it. Okay. So now I'm going out. Now I'm eating out. Well, I could get the salad that I would enjoy cooking at home, but I'm out and I'm spending money. So I might as well get the thing I really want since I'm going to spend a lot of money on it. So there's this psychology. And then I just get stuck in that. Right. And I'm a super social person. I'm constantly meeting people. Like that's just a part of my personality and also part of my business. And so I need to come up with a better way to not succumb to that when I'm out. That's my kryptonite.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's definitely the thing that I struggle with the most is how do I become more intentional with my choices when other people are making the choices that maybe move me away from my goals. I really believe the concept of the friction is something that people don't really take enough time to think about. For me, what the friction means is it's this idea that there are going to be things that are going to make it harder for me to reach my goals. The goal is not to get rid of the friction. The friction is going to happen. We actually need to be able to understand how do we live with the friction and how do we become okay with the friction. And actually, sometimes how do we even use the friction to our advantage?
Tell me more about that. That actually really got me curious. How can I use friction to my advantage?
So, this idea that the friction is always something that is negative can actually be flipped on its head. And we can actually start to use this friction as something that's positive. Here's an example from my life, right? So I struggle going back to the nutrition thing. I struggle with binge eating tendencies around sweets and processed food, right? I am not the kind of person that can just have this two Oreos, the serving size of Oreos, right? If there's a sleeve of Oreos, I'm eating the sleeve of Oreos, right? And I know this about myself. So what I do to try to increase the friction is I don't let processed food and really unhealthy sweets into my house. I'm not saying I never eat them, but what I really do is I try to increase the friction by saying I have to, let's say I want ice cream, right? Instead of having a pint of ice cream or a gallon of ice cream in my fridge that I'm going to go to whenever I want ice cream, I have to put on shoes, drive to the store, or more importantly, drive to an ice cream shop where I can get one scoop of ice cream. I'll eat that ice cream, I'll enjoy it there, and I'll go home and I'm not tempted to eat more because I don't have any more in the house, right? I've added friction to this habit that I'm trying to minimize, which is overindulging in sweets.
I totally resonate with that. A similar thing for me was a struggle when I was drinking too much alcohol. Um, I I found that the biggest shift for me was not keeping it in the house, and it doesn't mean it never was in the house, right? There are times where there's a party or whatever, but I always can tell. when there's a party, it's so easy to have that leftover alcohol be in the house and just drink it. You know what I mean? Like it's right there, it's right in the fridge. I find myself drinking a lot more because of that. But if I just don't keep it in the house and I have to go to a bar or go to a friend's house, that friction's high enough to where the frequency goes way down.
Sometimes, in order to add friction to something, we almost have to do things that don't make sense. So I've had to throw away perfectly good food because I just don't want it in the house. And there's part of my brain that's going, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't make sense. I shouldn't be throwing away food because that's wasteful and I don't want to be wasteful. So let me just eat the food instead. Right. But I have to take a step back and go, what are my goals? What am I trying to move towards? And does keeping the food in the house help me move towards my goals? And if it doesn't, sometimes I have to make the decision that, hey, I'm not keeping this in there. And maybe a better way is I invite friends over and let them enjoy it as well, right? Same thing with alcohol. Instead of being like, well, the alcohol's in the house, I have to drink it. Maybe you bring it over to a friend's house or to a kickball game and you let other people consume it so that, yeah, I could still have a drink or two, but I'm not keeping all of this in the house and forcing myself to overindulge just because it's there. Right. I'm sure this resonates with a lot of people. And I'm sure there's other habits that you can start to think of, okay, wow, this is something that, I struggle with. And if I was to add a little bit of friction, maybe remove myself from the thing, or, I know a lot of people who are smokers, right, who are trying to quit. They don't let themselves buy cigarettes, right? They don't let themselves have cigarettes in the house. Maybe something will happen where they come across someone and they have a cigarette. It's like, okay, I'll have it there, but I'm really trying to reduce the ability for me to have them in the house. So I will keep them away from me.
I think taking all these concepts, you're kind of essentially doing a friction audit for me around nutrition. Coming back to that earlier example I gave, how can I change that? I feel like I've struggled with this for a long time. And I have some things that will help. Again, like if I do food prep on Sunday, that seems to be my magic strategy. But there's got to be other ways that I can make it even easier. And I'm kind of lost on how to do that.
Honestly, the first way and probably the biggest thing you can do is just to become aware of the friction in the first place. So, one of the things I do with my clients, like I'd mentioned, is I put them through a questionnaire and it's like 50, 60 different, not even questions, they're statements. They're statements that are something along the lines of, you know, I feel unaware about what steps to take and how to achieve my health goals. Or, chronic pain and fatigue reduces my energy levels and motivation and makes it harder for me to perform healthy activities, right? They're statements and you rate yourself high to low in these statements so that you can understand, ooh, this is something that I struggle with. This one isn't. Maybe I don't struggle with seeing setbacks as a complete failure and giving up on my goals entirely. That's not me. I'm pretty steadfast. So that one I would rank lower. What we end up getting is this long list of things that cause friction in my life or things that unique to me are things that I identify. Once we've identified them, we've already put them in our brain of things. Once we see it, we're going to be more aware of it, right? It's the similar thing where it's like, once you've heard a term for the first time, then all of a sudden you feel like you hear it everywhere, right? Your brain is primed to become more aware of when this is going to happen. But the second step, and this is actually something I developed a little bit later in my practice, which is taking this list and taking the things, highlighting the ones that we really are going to struggle with, and in a very clear and a very non-emotional state of mind, going, okay, what am I going to do about this when it happens? Almost like you're giving yourself this toolkit of things that when this friction occurs, I told myself in a clear and sober mind what I was going to do about it. So I'm not getting this anxiety, this panic about, oh, how do I deal with this? I've already given myself the answer. I did it beforehand, right? So what you do is you take, let's say, the top 15 things that you struggle with. Or let's say you do struggle with setbacks, seeing setbacks as a complete failure. Well, write out what you're going to do next time you have a setback, right? Give yourself an emotional pep talk of how you're going to get through this and just remind yourself, hey, okay, I'm a strong person. I've dealt with setbacks before. I've come through this, right? When these setbacks happen, instead of scrambling to try to find a solution or giving up entirely, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to take a few breaths. I'm going to go back to to what I had told myself. And I'm just going to remind myself that I'm doing what I need to do. These setbacks are going to happen. I actually planned for them. That's okay. Just take a step back and know that, hey, just because it's one step back doesn't mean I'm not going to make two or three more steps forward. Give yourself the answers before you come across the problem. That's kind of how I've approached this with clients. And for myself, it's been the thing that has helped me become a little bit more consistent with these things, right? I I used to struggle with getting into the gym regularly. And as simple as it sounds, I would want to get to the gym, let's say at 7 in the morning. Well, that means I have to set my alarm for 6:15. That means I have to lay out my clothes the night before. It means I probably make my pre-workout and I just put it in a bottle in the fridge so that I don't have to increase the friction by making that in the morning. Right. I also probably have to take a look at when I'm going to bed, because if I'm getting up earlier, I need to be going to bed earlier. I'm taking a look at, okay, this is the thing that's going to prevent me from getting to my goals. What am I going to do about it before that even happens, so that there's a less of a chance of it happening, right? The goal is not to eliminate friction. The goal is to reduce friction by being prepared and understanding where this friction is going to happen.
And it's not just about reducing the friction, right? It's about adding friction to the other parts of things you don't want to do, which is so smart. And if you have both of those, you're going to have way more power over the habits in your life. Also, it's kind of cool hearing you talk about this questionnaire. I have known you're a personal trainer, you've been my personal trainer, and I hadn't heard about this. And that's such a cool tool. And I love that you're using it. Is that something that I can find online, or is there a way other people could find this?
It's actually a good question. Maybe in the future we make this something that's more publicly available. But for right now, what I would recommend is, let's take the habit of building nutrition, right? And more important, let's get more specific with that. Let's say the habit is meal prepping lunch and dinner for the week. Okay, let's just take that as the habit you're trying to build here. Well, when going into your next week, start to think about what are the things that make it easier and harder to achieve that goal. I'm assuming it's going to be harder to achieve that goal if we don't research a couple meals or maybe a couple recipes that we want to make for the week. I'm assuming it's also going to be harder to achieve that goal if we don't have the food that we're going to be able to use to make those recipes for at least the next 3 to 4 days, right? Understanding, okay, if I don't do this, then this won't happen, is a really good way to go. This is where the friction is, right? Maybe you live in a place like, I saw this really cool documentary about, I believe it was Trenton, New Jersey, and how they were basically calling it a food desert. And what they meant by that is there was very limited access to fresh food in this entire city. There was really only like two or three places where you could get fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. One of them was like a convenience store, like little, corner of a convenience store. And one was this bigger grocery store that was all the way on the edge of town, right? All they really had access to in this place was fast food and, quick and easy, highly processed restaurants. So maybe you live in a place where it's just hard to access good food, right? That would be an external source of friction, right? Maybe you don't like to eat the same things over and over again. You struggle with boredom and lack of novelty.
I do
Okay,
struggle with that.
great. So for someone like you, having the same foods for lunch and dinner every single day for the next 3 or 4 weeks probably doesn't sound that entertaining, right? So maybe it requires a little bit more understanding of, okay, I do have this psychological friction around, boredom and lack of novelty. Okay, well that requires me to, maybe I go by someone I know and trust's resource of 30 or 40 meals, or maybe I go buy a cookbook from someone that I really like, so that I know, hey, I know I like novelty, so all I have to do is flip through these pages, find something that I like, go buy those ingredients, and that way I have the things I need to be able to stay consistent, cook the meal, not get bored, and be able to reach my goal of being consistent with my meal prepping for lunch and dinner.
You're giving me another idea too, because I totally agree with everything you just said. And if I can start to do that on the weekends, which I've done before, but again, get back into that habit of meal prepping, planning out my recipes. That way I'm satisfying that need for novelty, right? But I've got all that set up so that when I'm tired during the week, I just get to pull what's out of the fridge and get going. I think the other thing that I need that has been missing is to have 7 like bulletproof recipes for myself, because inevitably I'm going to fall off the train. Inevitably there's going to be a weekend when I'm out of town, or there's like a wedding, right? And I don't get to do the meal prep on the weekend because the weekend's fully packed, right? So I need something that helps me recover midweek. And I think that what that would be is 7 meals that I know that I like, that I have already listed out the recipes. I know how to make them. They're not hard. I'll enjoy them, and I can just quickly go to the grocery store and grab them, right? It's like those 5 ingredient meals that I will not be bummed to eat consistently. So I don't know. I feel like this could be my rescue approach. You know what I mean? But it reduces the friction because I've already got them planned out in my phone.
I would almost take it one step further. What if for those 5 to 7 recipes that you have, what if you just always kept the base ingredients for those on deck, right? For me, one of those go-to recipes is uh, chickpea pasta with meat sauce, right? So what I always have in my house, if you go in my fridge right now, I have ground beef, I have pasta sauce, I have an onion, I have a pepper, and I have chickpea pasta. I just keep those 5 things on deck. I buy them every single week, whether I'm planning on making that meal or not,
That's so
so
genius.
that when I get to that point where it's Thursday
It's just
night,
always there.
it's always there, right?
Mm,
That is the thing where we take it one step further, because even if we do go with what you had said before, which is just have those meals on the ready, I still have the friction of going to the grocery store, right? And there's going to
yeah.
be days where that's easier, there's going to be days where that's harder, but to really reduce the friction, I just have those things in my pantry at all times, and they could be something as simple as some relatively healthy frozen meals if they had to be, right? This is not necessarily our reliant strategy, but it's a break glass in case of emergency thing where, hey, I don't have to go buy McDonald's. I can go make this meal that I have prepackaged or pre-prepared, and I don't have to necessarily struggle with this idea that I have to go through all this friction just to be able to have a healthy meal tonight.
100%. This friction idea is awesome. I feel like this is something that I can start to apply in a lot of different areas of my life. And I think even just having this conversation makes me realize we don't sit and spend enough time thinking about these things, right? We let ourselves get caught in these cycles of being frustrated with how our habits are going, but we're moving so fast that we don't really take the time to understand why we're stuck. And I think this idea that you have of this friction audit or friction questionnaire is genius because the act of taking the questionnaire slows you down and helps you spend time going, what do I need to do to really transform my life to reach the goals that matter to me most?
Where the mind goes.